Welcome everybody to week 5 of our 8-week long webinar series designed to prepare you for life as an international student. Today, Krish and I are super happy to announce that we have two of our amazing partners joining us as speakers, Sprintax and Adro. We're going to hand it over to them and they're going to be handling the presentation for today. Sara, would you like to kick us off with introductions and then Elvera can follow?
Absolutely. Nice to meet everyone. So I'm Sara Schmitt. I'm the COO and co-founder of Adro, and we're better banking for international students. Anyone coming over to the US without a social, we want to get you hooked up before you move. I have an MBA from Cornell. I went to Allegheny College for my undergraduate degree, and I've always lived and worked in the US. So I want to answer all your questions about money and just what it's like to kind of spend money and to be here in the US and figure all that stuff out. So don't be shy. If you've got something that you want to ask privately, feel free to just send that to Ansh or Krish, and they can also just pass it on. So yeah, happy to help and looking forward to diving in.
Great. And hi, everybody. My name is Elvera. I am an account manager here at the Sprintax team. So Sprintax are the only online non-resident tax preparation provider that can assist with federal and state tax preparation. But I'm excited to bring you through kind of everything you need to know about taxes as a non-resident in the US, what you need to be aware of, so that you're prepared and you're ready for tax season. So please do send through any questions you've got. We're happy to answer any that you've got.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to run everybody through the agenda real quick, for the first 30 minutes or so of the webinar, we're going to have Sara present and talk about the US financial system as a whole a little bit. And then we'll pass it over to Elvera and she'll talk about taxes in the United States as an international student. So Sara, why don't you kick us off?
Let's do it. All right. I will have a presentation for you guys and let me know if you can see this.
Yep,
good.
We can see it.
Excellent. Yep. Excellent. All right, so welcome. Super excited that you're coming over here. This is going to be a really exciting adventure, whether you're coming for undergrad for 4 or 5 years or graduate school. It's a great place to study and learn. I hope you have an awesome experience. I already told you a little bit about me. So I grew up, I'm very much a New Yorker. I've also lived in Seattle and Wisconsin, in New Jersey, all along all the cold parts of the US, basically. I know a lot about, of course, US banking, since that's what I work in, but also starting a company and entrepreneurship. I've flown a lot. I've flown 1.5 million miles and traveled around the world, so I can tell you a lot about that kind of thing. And I'm an active investor. So hopefully it'll give you a good sense of different things you can do in the US. And I really want to leave you guys with a few tips around what to look for when you're looking at US accounts and things to watch out for, things that are normal, things that are not. So we'll start a little bit with bank accounts. They are a little bit different in the US than what you might be used to. So our most common account in the US is called a checking account. And this is what most Americans, when they say I have a bank account, this is what they're referring to. This is a current account in India or China, and it's basically the same thing. In the US, there are some limits on how much money you can put in the account. Typically, if it's more than 250,000, it's not insured in the same way. So you want to keep this to be your daily expenditures and the amount of money you need for probably a few months or maybe to hold some of your tuition money. If you plan on getting a job or working at any point in the US, this is how you get paid. Your school would, or whatever business you're working for, would pay you into a checking account. So you do need one of these. One question I get a lot is, can I just use a Forex card or can I just use a credit card in the US? And you can for most things, but if you're looking at actually making income, which helps you get a social security number and is a good idea, you'll need that checking account. Checking accounts come with debit cards, and the way you use those is as you swipe them, as you spend, the money is taken out of your account immediately. So it's really just like spending cash, but it's a little bit more secure. It's a little bit protected. And if you have to dispute a transaction, you can do that. Very few people use checks anymore. I think I actually have checks here. So an example of a paper written check. They're not accepted in most places. A lot of big grocery stores used to accept them. They're mostly turning away from that. Occasionally, some places will still have you pay rent with those, but usually everything's online at this point. So you don't really have to order them.
Sarah, sorry to cut you off, but we can see
Great
presenters
question.
view. Do you mind switching over to, yeah.
No problem. Thank you. How about that?
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay. So when you're choosing a bank account, a couple things to watch out for. There are bank accounts and there are account options specifically designed for students or for international students. Look for accounts that support international money transfers or that waive or reduce the fees. FDIC insured is pretty standard, but double check for it. That is normal in the US. Bank accounts should be protected up to $250,000. In case the bank shuts down, if you have that money in there, you'll get it back. One of the things that's kind of hidden, and I see a lot of bank accounts doing this and people don't pay attention to it, is account fees, subscription costs, and minimum balance fees. Even some of the banks that schools are offering require these. So take a look, and if you're choosing a bank, those minimum requirements can be a little tough to meet. Some of the accounts like that Chase offers or Bank of America, you have to have $500 in the account at all times, and if you dip below that, they start charging you $5, $10 a month just to have the account. So that can be tough. If you're a student and you're really running close on budget, you don't really want those. There's plenty of accounts that don't charge fees, so you shouldn't have to pay those. Other things to watch out for, banks are getting sneaky. The government has fortunately been cracking down on a lot of the really high fees and saying you can't charge these anymore. So banks are looking for more creative ways to make money. Occasionally they'll charge overdraft fees. If you spend too much, if you spend more than you have in the account, they'll charge you money for that, which is kind of mean because you clearly don't have the money to begin with. Foreign transaction fees are unfortunately pretty common. And transfer fees, wire fees, there's quite a few of those too. So just watch out for them, know what they are, and it may just kind of change the way that how frequently you move money in and out. Increasingly, I'm seeing a lot of subscription fees. Again, there's banks that don't charge them. You just have to watch and know. To open an account, you'll typically need your identification. So your passport, your visa, maybe your I-20. You have to have a US address. This is really crucial. So to actually fully open and start using a US bank account, you need to physically be in the US, on US soil, using an IP address in the US or at a bank. You need to have a residential address, not just a post box, but actually a place where you live and can receive mail. And many banks will also require that you verify your enrollment with the school or kind of show that there's some proof of that visa, that you're really here legitimately. Some banks will also require you to make an initial deposit, not a big one, just a small one to make sure that you have money to fund the account and you're serious about opening it. Occasionally you'll be asked for some other ID. It's always good to bring all the things with you when you're opening accounts or kind of doing some of this early setup or when you're sitting down to do it online. All right. Credit, I'm whipping through this, so I want to give you guys a really good overview of the whole landscape. But credit is something that not every other country does quite the same way as the US. It's super important in the United States. Having a credit score is really a foundational financial thing that you need, and it will help you get an apartment in the future. It helps you get a phone plan, a cell phone plan that you pay for at the end of every month. Many businesses will check your credit as part of making sure that you're eligible for a loan or for a more expensive service. So building a credit score is something you kind of do want to think about early on. So the easiest way to do that is to get a credit card or a credit builder card or some type of way to build credit and then use it. Use it in a responsible way. Don't overspend and make sure you pay that on time. That's really one of the biggest factors that goes into a credit score. When you start off, you won't have a very high credit score because you have no history. But over time, your credit score gets better the longer they have the history and data. So the more data there is, typically the higher that credit score can go. But it is possible to get a credit score in the 700s within 6 months if you are responsible and pay everything in a timely way. So I strongly recommend that the first accounts you open in the US would be checking and then also a credit account. And the credit can be a little bit trickier to find without a social security number, but it absolutely is doable. One of the things that we did when we designed our Adro product is that we not only made it possible to get a credit card without a social, but we also start reporting any of your spending to the credit bureaus right away. So you can actually start building that credit score. And then when you get your social, you already have a higher score. We're going to retroactively report. And so you already got a head start there. Things to choose and look at when you're choosing a credit card. Early on, you may not have a lot of choice, frankly, because without a social security number, some of those credit cards are going to be off limits. There's many that are very premium or have a higher subscription fee and require having a strong credit history and a score of a certain threshold. But there are good student-friendly options, and you want to look for something that has a reasonable percentage rate APR. So if you do have a balance, it's not super expensive to carry that for a short period of time. You want to look and see if there's any minimum fees or requirements around how often you have to use it. Some cards have really great benefits, but they do make sure they vary in the fine print that you have to use it a certain number of times per month. The one that stands out to me, the Built credit card that lets you pay your rent for free with a credit card, is one of those cards. It sounds really good, but you have to meet some minimum spend and some minimum swipe requirements per month. You can always get another card later. So maybe the card you start with isn't the card that you're going to use forever and ever. But I would warn you that when you want to save the first credit card you get, because it's your oldest and your longest credit history. So you want to pick something good that you can reasonably use for a while and that you hang on to in the future so that you don't erase that history if you cancel a card.
Sorry, real quick. Somebody asks in the chat, does the credit score transfer from India to the US, or is this independent?
No, unfortunately, we have ways of accessing it and looking it up in the US. So many folks are using Credit Nova or other ways of checking that, but it doesn't just carry over. So you have to really rebuild the score with the credit agencies in the US. So Experian, Equifax, all of those guys, they want to have their own score and they base it purely on the US spend.
That said, there are a few companies like American Express that you can apply to using your Indian credit score. So if you don't have an SSN, you can still apply for that card if you've had a card in India previously or any country previously. It's a long drawn process, and I would not recommend it. I'd recommend starting out the way Sarah's mentioning with a secure credit card and then move to building your own score. But it's possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. But unfortunately, you don't get to use that history and just bring it over. I wish. But of course, all the credit aid bureaus are basically like businesses and they want all their own data. So some tips here, just start small. If you have not used a credit card before, use it for planned purchases, pay it off on time. You can pay off your balance immediately and treat it like a debit card if you want to be really careful. Some people like to try to get the best card they can and switch around a lot. That can impact your credit score negatively. So you really want to be thoughtful about the cards you sign up for and use, and also be aware of how many you have. It can be really tempting because there's a lot of marketing to students and to younger users of credit in the US. So to try to avoid opening and closing accounts and say, oh, I'll just sign up with the store card and then I'll cancel it, because that all gets tracked as part of your credit score. Interest is really high on credit cards. It's really kind of scary. They're very expensive loans, and you don't want to be racking up a balance and not paying it off. So use your credit card in a way that you're able to pay off and keep within your budget, because sometimes those rates are 24, 36%, and that accumulates every month. So it's really easy to get into debt quickly. There are definitely better options if you need to go into debt for something, or you need an additional loan, or you need money. There are probably ways to find that and access that are going to be cheaper than a credit card. So that's always a good conversation to have with your student services office at school. If you're just like short on school fees or need some help paying for books, there's probably options there before you have to put things on a credit card.
And on top of the interest you incur, some credit cards also have a late fee. So you're not only paying the interest, you're also paying a late fee, which is usually around $30, $35. It's just crazy. Don't miss your credit card payments. If you can, once you get used to it, learn to automate the payments. There's a setting called auto pay, and you can set that to the same date every month so you don't end up missing a payment.
Great point. I do that too. I just do it as a safety net. I am good about paying it down, but I also have the auto pay turned on. So it's just, I don't even have to think about it. Some advanced tips. Credit can be useful to use online, especially if you're making a larger purchase or you're buying something maybe from an international store or a retailer you don't know as well. I'll use it for purchases where I really want to make sure it arrives on time. And if it doesn't, I have some way of like going back to that company and saying, hey, I need to cancel this, or my credit card company can help me claw back that money. There are cards, of course, that have costs. So some credit cards, it costs maybe $700, $500 a year, and they have a lot of fancy benefits, but they don't make sense unless you're going to use them a lot. So you really might have to do the math on that. And I'd say as a student, it wasn't worth it to have those cards right away. Now, as someone who's working and traveling more and doing some things very heavily, then it may make sense to do that. But as a student, I wasn't spending enough to make those cards really, really worth that fee. The last thing I would note about credit too is that you can ask for help if you are in trouble or you've overspent or you're struggling with a balance, you don't think you can pay on time. Call your credit card company, call the issuer, and often they have options. They can help adjust the payment. They can help maybe wipe a late fee off. They can offer you a special program. You don't really want to get into the spot to begin with, but if you do, always ask for help right away. Don't let it get bad. Say, hey, I just need another week. And many times they'll say, great, we can waive this for 1 month so that there's not a negative impact on your credit. That's huge. And that's important to know is like, just if you feel like you're in trouble, ask for that help really early. All right, let's talk about some more fun stuff, like moving money, saving money, spending money. You guys are probably familiar with some online transfer services like Flywire and Wise, Remitly, Flutterwave. A lot of ways to move money into bank accounts. They're usually pretty quick. Sometimes there are delays. So the delays can come in because there are multiple banks involved in transfer processes in the US. It's not always direct, and many times money has to move through a few different layers. It's not super transparent, unfortunately. We've done a lot of testing of this actually in the past few months, and it's super interesting to see which banks money kind of goes through when you use these different services. Usually fees are communicated pretty clearly, but what's less clear is how long it takes. So don't wait to pay your tuition or other big bills. You really want to make sure you plan and leave a few days for money to move into an account. And it may take time to both send and get it out. Wire transfers and bank transfers, same deal. There may be delays in those processes too on either side. So there's some intermediaries, and the fees are they'll tell you what they are. It's not the most fun. So trying to do transfers in groupings, trying to transfer your money up front can be helpful and save you fees. All right, you guys probably are in the process of transferring money over or will be soon. What you need on the US side are your account number. So typically there's a routing number and an account number, and you'll be able to find that pretty easily within your bank app or online. Some banks will also ask you to specify the account type and the address of the bank. And again, those are typically provided up front within the bank app. I know whenever I log in to either Adro or another bank that I have, I can just see that quickly. And there's actually a PDF I can pull down with all of this information. Sometimes there's transfer limits. It does vary. And I think India has a $250,000 a year transfer limit. And then some banks also set different limits. So you may have to move money over in chunks if your bank is really restrictive there. One thing I would caution you guys on, there are a lot of people targeting international students coming over, especially male international students, assuming that they're carrying cash into the US. So be really cautious about that. It is good to bring some cash, some USD, so that you have some ability to spend right away or get to where you need to go and buy a bottle of water and food, things like that. But really, really avoid bringing over the maximum in cash if you can, because your suitcases could get inspected. Someone could try to take your bags, and you really don't want to lose that, and that's not insured. Bring enough money to cover your expenses and emergencies, but try to keep your cash protected in an account as much as possible. And if you can get smaller bills, $100 bills are accepted in the US, but some businesses, especially small, like mom and pop businesses, can't break that down into smaller bills, and they just don't accept them because there can be a lot of counterfeit there.
Sarah, how much do you recommend students fill in their bank account before they arrive in the United States?
Ooh, good question. It probably depends if you're going to be moving over all the money you need for a semester, or for just a few weeks, or if you just want to get started and like see then how much you need. I'd say at least a few thousand. If you're going to put your tuition in there, if you're not going to pay directly from your home country, you'd want to make sure that you're covered for at least that semester. Books and other supplies can be maybe up to $1,000 for that first semester. And then if you have a computer, great. If you don't, you want to budget for that as well. And that can be anywhere between $300 for like a simple Chromebook to maybe $2,000 for a nicer MacBook. So it kind of depends what you need. Most students I know, if you're living on campus, if you have a meal plan with the school, your expenses could be easily with below $1,000 a month. That should be more than enough for other meals out or fun activities or other costs you have. I think when I was in school and working, I was making a little bit around that amount per month, and I was able to save a little. So you probably need a few, between a few hundred and 1,000 a month for incidentals.
Sounds
I
good.
would recommend moving bunch of money together like for the semester purely because you're paying international transfer fees,
True.
which is not cheap. Now, good thing is certain banks do refund that fees to you if you move money downwards of twice a year, which is very beneficial. So if you can, I would suggest moving as much money as you need for the semester in one go and keeping it in your savings account, and then you can move whatever you need for daily spend or monthly spend into your checking account. So most of your money is kept secure, except what you need to use on the day-to-day. That's easily accessible through your checking. So there are many ways to break it up. Definitely, Sarah, if you could touch a bit upon how to segregate between savings and checking, that would be awesome. Oh, yes, just hop into how to budget. Yeah.
Sure. Let's talk about that. So getting a savings account can be helpful because that'll kind of keep the money that you want to set aside a little bit more protected. So I use a high yield savings account that has a higher interest rate for money that I'm not going to touch for a while, and then I want it to earn some interest. Just as a note, without it, you can't earn interest in a US savings account without a social security number. So that won't be open to you right away. Instead, you may just want a basic savings account that's not earning interest, or one that will start earning interest once you have that social. And it's just nice to kind of keep the money separate so you don't think about it and then don't touch that until you need it. So a great place to put your tuition money and keep it protected in USD. Most banks will offer a savings account in addition to a checking account. You can also just keep the money in your checking account, but it gets a little harder to determine what's for spending and what you should keep set aside. So yeah, definitely that's a great tip. I do want to touch on budgeting too. You'll probably hear about a lot of different tools that people use, but most of my friends, most of us just use a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be fancy. Budgeting is really just about knowing what you spend and what you want to do and balancing those things. It's about prioritizing and making sure that you're covering all your expenses, but also doing things that you enjoy. The biggest thing I think you have to worry about in school is, of course, school loans and balancing that debt. And it's okay to borrow for school. It's important. It's okay to borrow to buy a home. These are big investments, and most people don't have the cash to pay for that up front. But you want to be careful about dipping into loans and debt for things that are nice to haves, like spring break trips or just fun dinners out. Like that can get really expensive. So you want to try to look for other ways to cover those, or poke your friends and say, "Hey, I can't do dinner out this week, but let's go play games in the dorm instead. Let's go do this event that the school's putting on with free pizza." There's lots of fun free options on campuses, and you should definitely use them. I actually attended a really interesting budget webinar for folks in the US or a few months back, and I learned some great tips that I think were really helpful. And one of the best pieces of advice they had was your budget's going to look a little different every month. It's really, most people think that it's going to be the same exact thing every month, but there's going to be expenses that are like come up only once a year. And so that means that every month is going to look just a bit different. And that's okay as long as your things balance out in the long run. When you're in school, you're probably not going to be able to save as much. So when you kind of Google budgeting online, there are a lot of people say save 20% or 30% of what you have. Well, when you're in school, you're spending money to be in school. So if you don't always have a lot of savings, and your focus should really be on keeping your debt low. If you can get a scholarship, if you can earn some money and kind of put that towards your school expenses, that's great. You're probably not going to come out of school with a lot saved up. If you do have a side hustle or a job and you are making money, that's awesome. Congrats. You are in like that elite percentage of people who are doing that. But it's okay if you don't, because most folks go into debt for school and then come out of that and get an awesome job and pay it off. And you don't, like I said, you don't have to spend a lot of money to have fun, especially while you're in school. There's a lot of free activities. Take advantage of all of them. The school pays for them. And then join a club and plan those activities so that you can do the things that you want to do. Savings, biggest way to save money is to reduce your cost of living and your housing. Your housing cost is probably going to be the biggest chunk of your budget. It almost always is. Getting roommates, finding a spot with friends, that's going to save you money. If you share a room, it's always cheaper on campus. If you get an off-campus apartment and get roommates and share it, it's going to be less expensive than living on your own. Try to make breakfast on your own or lunch. I used to do that in my dorm. I used to just like make oatmeal or something simple in the morning, or even go stock up at the store and just use my microwave. I take leftovers and like that gets me an extra meal. I did include some basic cost of living kind of estimates here, but these vary a ton depending on where you're going. New York City is very different than Omaha, Nebraska, or Austin, Texas, or LA. So every city is going to have different costs, and rural versus urban America are quite different. Cell phone plans are pretty consistent across the US. Dinners in college towns are probably like $20 or less in most cases. So those are fairly consistent. But these are like the annual costs that are the averages across all schools in all cities in the US. And you guys will get this deck at the end too, so no need to like take furious notes. You guys will get a copy of this. Other tips, always ask for a student discount. Even if there isn't one posted, say, do you have a student discount? And many times they do, or they'll say, no, but we can give you 10% off. Take it. Sign up for all the brands and the companies and all the places you want to go. And local businesses, many times they have like free coffee or buy 5 sandwiches, get 1 free, things like that. Coupons, we use coupons here. It's weird and old school, but you can find good stuff that way. A lot of good secondhand and thrift sites. Those are super popular, and you can find really good products that way. Buy used or digital textbooks. I thought I was going to like save my textbooks forever and wanted to get like nice new ones. They go out of date really quickly. There's no point in spending a ton of money on them. Get share digital ones. Use the library. They also have a lot of books and materials that you need that you don't have to pay for. Check your bank marketplace or credit card. Many times those products will have a whole ecosystem of different offers and discounts, and some of them are really good. So I always check there first before I'm shopping online. If you live off campus and you guys can go to like bulk or discount warehouses like Costco or Sam's Club and buy things like big quantities of things and save a lot of money that way. And ask around. Sometimes you'll have a friend or even a professor or somebody who's like, I can get a discount on that for you. So I just shamelessly ask as a student, or even now as an adult, like who has a deal on something, who's got a code for something. Let's see, last thing before I chat a little bit about Adro is scams. Watch out. Like I know you'll hear this from schools too. Your school will definitely make you do an e-learning thing on this, but there's a lot of very sophisticated scams targeting international students, and it sucks. And with AI, they're getting really good. Watch out for anyone who's pushing you to do something quickly. You know, the US government and your school are not fast moving. There's never anything that's like urgent, same day, you have to deal with your visa right now, or that you have to do for your school. The government doesn't move that quick. And if there's something you have to do, there's typically a way to do it late, and they'll just charge you a fee. So it looks very legitimate. They may be sending you emails or texts or messages. Most of the time, the US government does not communicate that way with you. They won't call you. They'll send you a letter, or they will tell you to log into your portal, your secure portal, and check something there. So watch out for that. Always like try to slow the process down and ask for help. If someone says you can't ask anyone or you can't talk to anyone, that's a red flag. That's like, the government and the school will always tell you, of course, if you're not sure, you don't believe me, come to the office, call back, ask a friend. That's totally fine. They'll give you all the time you need to figure stuff out. Never pay for anything with gift cards. Don't pay for things with Zelle or other immediate fast transfer methods. If someone says, Venmo me this right away, that's usually scammy. Like, it doesn't feel good. If anyone asks for passwords or codes, don't do it. They're trying to get into your account. And most banks, most schools, the government, they won't communicate via text or social media. That's not how they work. They're going to send you emails. And if you at any point say, I just don't feel comfortable with it, they'll say, no problem, let's find another way where it feels secure. Scammers won't do that. So watch out for that. I want you guys to get here, be safe, keep your money, and not get suckered. All right. Last thing I've got for you, I just wanted to share a little bit about what we've built, and I hope it's useful for you and interesting. If you want to get set up with your bank account ahead of time, Adro can help you do that. We have everything. We have checking, savings, and credit. You can sign up online, and I've got the link here, and that QR code will also take you to the Rome page, and you can sign up right from there. Our credit card, you don't need a social. You can earn 1% cash back, and we do that credit reporting right away, even without a social. We've got ID theft protection and all the good stuff there. And then the checking account has free ATM withdrawals, and you can earn money on foreign transfers. So we try to make that very much geared towards international students and something useful and good, and comparable to the US cards. Questions for me?
We have
Somebody
one.
asks.
Yes,
Okay.
Ansh, go ahead.
For it, Krish. Okay, I'll go for it. Do you have any high yield savings accounts recommendations, considering that there won't be that much money in the HISA, so I won't be able to pay any high account / maintenance fees?
Good question. I use SoFi, and Goldman has another good account as well. But again, make sure that you have to have a social to earn the interest on those accounts. So if you do have a social security number already, you can definitely look at those. If you don't, you won't be eligible to earn that interest until you get a social. So that would just be 0% until that point. Instead, you could put that money, you could probably, it's either best to keep it in your home country invested, or potentially to look at some investment options here, although there's tax implications to that. Does that answer the question?
Just to reiterate, you cannot earn interest on a high yield savings account until you get a social security number. So
Right.
An alternative to that is you can either look for other investment opportunities, like investing in the stock market or something like that, or just keep the money back in your home country, or like get a certificate of deposit or something like that.
You can get a CD. Yeah, you may be able to get a CD. The challenge is that interest over a certain amount is taxable. And so it becomes a little bit tricky to track in the US. So some banks are like, we just don't want to deal with this because it's complicated to issue the necessary tax forms. So if you have enough money in one of those high yield savings accounts, it actually earns enough interest that you have to pay taxes on that every year.
Okay.
Yeah. But you
If there are no more.
Yeah, in most cases, you'll get your social as soon as you start working and find an on-campus job, which could be as soon as your second semester.
For sure. All this talk about high yield savings accounts, I need to open one too, so I'm going to do that after this call. Well, we're right on time. Sarah, that was an amazing presentation. I think if people have any questions, they'll start to throw them in the chat. We're going to hand it over to Elvera, where she can talk about taxes for international students.
Perfect. So let me share my screen. So let me know if that's come through okay. You seeing the...
Looks great.
All good. Perfect. Great. Okay, so I'm going to provide you today then with an introduction to US taxes for non-residents. So everything you need to be aware of. And I suppose the big thing here is to be aware that every non-resident, you know, on an FJ, M or Q visa needs to do something when it comes to taxes. So we'll guide you through everything you need to know here. But I suppose firstly, before I get into the real information, just a quick disclaimer. I suppose today I'm not going to give individual tax advice. You know, I'm going to give you the basic principles as they apply to you as non-residents in the US, but everybody's position is unique. You know, one minor detail could change how you're treated when it comes to tax. So important to keep that in mind. But I suppose the likes of Sprintax, the software itself, as you go through, we will work all of that out for you. You fill in your information, we'll do all the determinations, and we'll prepare the relevant forms for you. But an overview then of what we'll look at. So an overview of tax for non-resident students and scholars. So things you need to be aware of. We'll also look quickly at understanding the implications of filing an incorrect tax return or maybe not filing at all and what to do to correct that. And then of course, any questions or discussion. So feel free to pop your questions in the question box. So firstly, I suppose the first thing we'll always look at when we're looking at non-resident tax is residency for tax purposes. And it can be a bit confusing. So I suppose firstly, it's important to mention that residency for tax purposes, it's independent of your visa or immigration status. So although you may be non-resident on your immigration status, you could actually be resident for tax purposes. Because when it comes to resident versus non-resident for tax, it's all based on the number of days that you've actually spent in the US. So I suppose generally most international students or scholars on F, J, M or Q visas are considered non-resident for tax purposes. But the rule that the IRS follow is that if you're a J1 or an F1 student, generally you're considered non-resident for the first 5 calendar years here in the US. And after that 5-year period then, the IRS will look at what's known as the substantial presence test. So essentially, that substantial presence test, it sounds a bit like a crazy maths equation, but it's looking at all of your days of presence, you know, to determine your residency status. So it's looking back at the previous 3 years and looking at the days of presence in that time. So it'll look at all of your days of presence in the current year. It'll take 1/3 of your days of presence in the year before that, and 1/6 of your days of presence in the year before that. And if that totals 183 days or more, then you would be deemed resident for tax purposes. Suppose if you're considered resident for tax purposes, then you'd need to prepare a resident tax return. So it is important that you're preparing the correct tax return. But I suppose just to be aware again, Sprintax will work this out for you. So you don't need to do these calculations. You fill in your information through the Sprintax questionnaire. We'll ask you for your entry and exit dates. We'll work everything out for you. And we'll let you know then if you're non-resident, we'll go ahead and prepare the non-resident return for you. If you're resident, we'll stop you and we'll point you in the right direction. You know, so we'll set you straight. I suppose also as well, just to mention calendar year. So if, for example, Elvera entered the US on December 30th, 2023, but her semester at her university didn't start until February 2024, the IRS will actually count 2023 as Elvera's first year of presence in the US, even though I've only spent 2 days in the US in 2023. So just to be aware of that. Residency rules then, they change slightly for researchers or scholars on J visas. So if you're a researcher or scholar on a J visa, instead of the 5-year grace period where you're considered non-resident, you actually only get 2 years. And after that 2-year period then, the IRS will then look at the substantial presence test. So residency can be quite complicated, as I said, but you don't need to worry about it. We'll work all of that out for you. So it is important that you do provide details of all of your entry and exits in and out of the US since you first started visiting. Here then is just a quick summary slide outlining the different visa types, the number of years each visa type is exempt from the substantial presence test, and if there's a FICA exemption available. So you'll see here, for example, the F1 or the J1 student is exempt from the substantial presence test for 5 years and have that FICA exemption, whereas many of the other J1 categories then would fall under that 2-year rule. Again, you will have access to this information later, so don't worry about taking notes or anything. You'll be able to look back over any of this. So this then, I suppose, a really important slide, who must file for 2024? And important to be aware that every non-resident needs to do something when it comes to taxes and filing taxes. So at an absolute minimum, all non-residents need to file Form 8843, which I'll go through in a little more detail in the next slide. But you need to file Form 8843 irrespective of whether you've earned income or not during the tax year. So, you know, if you have, you're a student, you don't receive any income at all, you still need to complete Form 8843. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. You know, they think, okay, well, I didn't earn any income, I don't need to do anything when it comes to taxes. But it is really important to be aware that you do. As a non-resident on an F, J, M or Q visa, you need to do something, minimum being that Form 8843. But if you have received any income, anything that's considered income, maybe it's a taxable scholarship that covers your living expenses, that will trigger a filing requirement. It'll be the 1040 NR, the federal return, and possibly a state return too, depending on your situation. But I suppose most important thing here, just to be aware that every non-resident has some type of IRS filing obligation. So Form 8843 then, what is it? Well, as I said, it's a minimum filing requirement for all. Essentially, it's a declaration of your non-resident status for the tax year. It is pretty straightforward. It'll request your name, your address, the type of visa you're on, the number of days you've spent in the US. And by giving that information, then you've completed your obligation for Form 8843 filing. With Form 8843, if this is your only obligation, if you haven't received any income and it's just Form 8843 you need to submit, you don't need to have a social security number or an ITIN to submit this form. But if you do trigger a federal filing requirement, if you've received any income at all, you are going to need a tax number, be it a social security or an ITIN. And I'll chat a little bit more about ITIN a little later in the session. In terms of income documents that you may receive then, so the first, I suppose, and the most common would be a W-2 document, and Form W-2 is, it relates to wages, relates to salary or compensation, and it'll include details of any income that you've earned and any tax that was withheld on that income. And also just to be aware that you could receive multiple W-2s if you've had multiple employers. So if you worked for 2 different employers in 2024, say, you'd expect to receive a W-2 from each one. Now, the deadline to receive your W-2 is usually January 31st, 2025 for the 2024 tax year. So if you've received some income, you should receive a W-2 by the 31st of January. The second document then is the 1042S document. And this document applies mostly to taxable scholarships, stipends, any royalty payments, prizes. Any tax treaty exempt income will typically be outlined on a 1042S document. So let's say, for example, you receive a sports scholarship and your scholarship covers anything outside of tuition. So maybe it covers your room and board or meals or transport or whatever. You would expect to receive a W-2, or sorry, not a W-2, a 1042S, I should say, for that. But if your scholarship is not taxable, you wouldn't expect to receive this document. The deadline to receive your 1042S document is March 15th. So if you have received a taxable scholarship, for example, you'd expect to receive a I keep saying W2, a 1042S by March 15th. And the final document then is the 1099 series document. And that covers everything that's considered miscellaneous income. So what might that be? Well, that could be, say, for example, rental income from a property that you've had on Airbnb. So, you know, in such case, if you've had you've rented a room in your apartment on Airbnb for over 14 nights, Airbnb would issue with a 1099 series document. Also, if you had an investment account and you've made a gain on that, there's a high chance that your broker or the person you've made your investments with will issue you with a 1099 document. Also, then commissions are under the 1099 umbrella. But I suppose the most common one would be independent contractor services. So typically, if you're working independently and not as an employee of a business, you would receive a 1099 at the end of the filing year. But I suppose just to be aware that not everybody will receive all of these documents. You'll only receive the ones that are relevant to you. You may not receive any. If you haven't received any income, you won't receive these documents. But I suppose just to be aware that it is important when filing your tax return, if you're expecting any of these income documents, you need to be sure that you've got those documents before you sit down to prepare your taxes. FICA taxes then, what is it? Well, I suppose if you're in the US at the age of 65 and you need assistance paying your medical bills, FICA tax would assist you with that. But the thinking is, as a non-resident international student, the chances are you're probably not going to be in the US at the age of 65 to benefit from that. And for that reason, there's a general rule that if you're a J1 or an F1 student, you're exempt from paying FICA taxes. But in a lot of cases, if you're working off campus, for example, your employer may not be aware of this and they may treat you the same as they would a resident who does pay FICA taxes. So what we'd say is check your W-2. There will be a section on there that says FICA or Social Security or Medicare. And if you've had tax withheld, and if you're on an F1 or a J1 visa as a non-resident, then you should firstly ask your employer for a refund. But if they're not willing to issue that refund or not in a position to do so, you can certainly apply for a FICA refund via form 843 or 8316. And again, that's certainly something that Sprintax can assist you with. So next then, we're looking at state taxes. So up until this point, we've chatted about how if you've received any income at all, you will trigger a filing requirement. Even if you didn't receive income, you need to submit form 8843. But if you've received income, you may also trigger a state filing requirement. And state tax rules differ from state to state. Some states will say that you only need to file if you earn over $8,000. Some will say $17,000, for example. Whereas others will say that you need to file from the very first dollar. And of course, we know there are some states where there's no state tax. But it can also depend on things like your visa type, the number of days that you've spent in the state, and even down to the type of accommodation you've lived in. So again, can be quite complicated, but this is something that Sprintax will work out for you as well. So as you go through and you fill in your questionnaire, we'll use the information you've provided to determine exactly what your filing obligations are, and we'll prepare those relevant forms for you. Next then, looking at important dates for 2024. So I suppose the tax year runs the same as the calendar year. So it's looking back at the period from January 1st to December 31st, 2024, we'll say. And we're looking at any income that you've earned during that period and any taxes that were withheld on that income and any days that you've spent in the US. So we're looking to figure out if you've overpaid or underpaid tax to the IRS or the state authority during the tax year. But I suppose the most important date to be aware of course, is the tax filing deadline. And that date this year is April 15th, 2025 for the 2024 tax year. So that is the date you need to have your tax returns submitted by. Even if it's just form 8843, we'd recommend getting it in by that April 15th deadline. Tax season won't open till towards the end of January, but once you've received your income documents, once that tax season opens, you can sit down, prepare your taxes and get it done, get it out of the way. And of course, if there's any refund due back to you, you're going to get that quicker if you get it submitted early. The closer you leave it to that tax filing deadline, the busier the IRS and the state departments are going to be, and the longer it'll take for you to receive your refund. So I mentioned ITIN, and I suppose this can be a bit of a trouble area. It can be, it can be complicated in terms of applying, but an ITIN is an individual taxpayer identification number. And I suppose for anyone that may be unfamiliar, it stands for individual taxpayer identification number, but it's generally required by individuals who've received taxable income and they need to file a federal tax return, but they're not eligible for a social security number. So it can be pretty common, and most common amongst scholarship recipients such as athletes. So, maybe you don't have a social security number, you're not going to be working in the US, but you're receiving a taxable scholarship. So in that case, you'd need to have an ITIN. Now, in terms of the application process, the application form is the W-7, and it can be applied for in advance of filing the federal tax return or alongside the federal tax return. But the process does change depending on which route you're going to go down. So in terms of applying for an ITIN in advance of filing the tax return, a responsible officer at your school can certify the required documents. So it can make things that bit more straightforward for you. But I suppose where the process changes then is where an individual is applying for an ITIN alongside the tax return. So in that case, unfortunately, the responsible officer at your school can no longer certify the documents unless they're a certified acceptance agent. So if you're applying for an ITIN alongside your tax return, you'd need to have your documents certified by a CAA, which is a certified acceptance agent, or at a local IRS office, or at the governmental department that issued your identification document, or at a US embassy or consulate. So it can be a little more complicated if you're doing it at, during tax season. So if you know you're going to need an ITIN, if you've received, say, a taxable scholarship, you don't have a social security number, you're going to need an ITIN. So we'd say apply for that as soon as you can, rather than leaving it till the last minute and doing it with your tax return. It's better to apply as soon as you know you're going to need that. So next then, looking at the implications of misfiling or maybe not filing at all. So there may be some of you on this session today that are thinking, okay, well, I've been in the US for the last number of years and I didn't do anything at all. Or maybe I filed last year and I filed incorrectly. I filed as a resident. So the first thing we'd always say is don't panic, but do set the record straight. So if you've never filed at all, we'd say definitely catch up. And the good news is that if you're due a refund in the last 3 years, the IRS are happy to issue that to you. If it's a case you owe the IRS money, there's no cutoff point. They won't go back just 3 years. They'll expect you to go back as far as necessary. If you've never filed at all, so maybe say you arrived in the US in 2022 or 2023 and you haven't done anything yet, we would say definitely catch up. You can file, but you can back file for whatever year you need to. And you can do that with Sprintax online for the last 3 years. If you need assistance to go back further than that, we can certainly help. But it is important that your tax record is up to date for every year that you've been in the US. Also, just to be aware as well, if it's a case you owe the IRS money, you haven't filed on time, they can apply fees and penalties and so on that as well. So just to be aware of that.
Elvera, we have one question real quick. How does paying taxes differ for those on an O1 visa?
So I suppose while they're considered non-resident, Sprintax will be able to assist. But if you're considered a resident for tax purposes, we'd stop you at step 1. We'll point you in the right direction. So Sprintax can help anyone while they're considered non-resident. So no matter what visa, while you're considered non-resident, we can still assist. But the best thing I'd always say, go in, complete step 1 on Sprintax. There's no fee for that. Just go in, fill in your details on step 1, and we'll point you in the right direction. If you're non-resident, we'll bring you on through the next steps. If you're resident, we'll point you in the right direction. We are the non-resident tax partner to TurboTax. So if you're considered resident for tax purposes, we'd send you over towards TurboTax.
There's another question. Is there a minimum income requirement for you to pay taxes?
No, so I suppose in terms of triggering a tax return, if you've received any income whatsoever, anything over $0. So previously there was a personal exemption where you could earn up to a certain amount before you'll trigger a filing requirement. But now anything over $0. So if you earn $5, $10, whatever the case may be, technically that will trigger a filing requirement. In terms of paying taxes, it depends on your situation. You may be entitled to a tax treaty that will exempt a certain amount or, of income on a certain, in a certain category or whatever, but it depends. It completely depends on your situation. Again, Sprintax will work all of that out for you. Okay, so just quickly looking at the implications of not filing or misfiling, and I know I've touched on some of these. So I suppose the one we'd always emphasize here, firstly, non-residents are required to comply with all US laws, including IRS and filing tax forms, even if it is just Form 8843. It's part of your visa conditions. But I suppose the one we highlight here, and the one we'll always emphasize, is the impact that it could have on your future immigration status. So, there may be some of you on here that are looking to stay in the US, maybe looking to apply for a change of status in future, for example. And it's highly likely that you'll be asked for evidence of tax compliance in your visa interview. So really important that you are up to date and correct on your tax record for every year that you've been in the US. Additionally then, if you owe money to the IRS, there's a high chance they will apply fees and penalties, and interest can accrue on that. But in a lot of cases, you'll actually receive a refund back. And this is the only way that you can get that, is by submitting your tax return. So really, really important. I suppose it's part of your visa conditions. You need to be aware of that. It's something you need to do, but you might also get a refund back. And I suppose lastly, before we touch on a tiny bit about Sprintax, but just to be careful about options being recommended to you. So, you may have friends, you've friends that are using TurboTax. They tell you, okay, I've filed with TurboTax, I got a refund of $1,000, and you go ahead and you do that. If you are non-resident, you need to submit a non-resident tax return. If you file as a resident, you're filing incorrectly, you're claiming credits and deductions and so on that you're not entitled to. If the IRS realize that you've filed as a resident, not only will they look for any refund they've given you in error there, they'll also apply fees and penalties, so just to be really careful of that. It is important that you do prepare the correct return. And you'll see here the little snippet from the TurboTax help page. Somebody asked, do TurboTax handle the Form 1040 NR for non-resident aliens? And they're saying, although TurboTax doesn't support this form, we have partnered with Sprintax to provide this. So they'd send you to Sprintax for that, whereas we'll send you to TurboTax if you're a resident. So just to be careful on the tax return that you're submitting. And lastly, then, just before we go into the questions, services that are available with Sprintax. So for anybody, say, who's starting a new employment, maybe needs assistance with pre-employment tax forms to ensure that you're taxed correctly, that you're getting any tax treaty benefits that you're entitled to, that you're paying the correct amount of federal taxes and so on, Sprintax forms can assist with that. And Sprintax returns, and of course, will assist with your tax returns. So as we've chatted about today, everyone needs to do something when it comes to tax. Sprintax returns will assist with the federal and the state. They'll help with ITIN, FICA applications, anything like that if needed. Now, many of you, your schools will work with Sprintax already, and you will receive communications from them. Come tax season, you'll be getting emails from them about filing your tax returns and so on. And of course, Rome will be sharing information with you as well. We will host webinars throughout season. So if you'd like to come along and learn a bit more about non-resident tax, you're welcome to come along to any of those sessions throughout season as well. So that's a quick whirlwind view of everything you need to know about non-resident tax. So any questions, please do pop them in.
Elvera, we should totally do another webinar around like January, February, maybe.
Definitely.
For our students.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing just to mention, actually, it is important, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to wait until you've got your income documents before you sit down to prepare your taxes. Because if you sit down, say, in February to do your taxes, and then you receive a 1042S a little later, you haven't reported all of your income details. You need to actually resubmit, you need to file an amended tax return, maybe if you've already submitted it, or you need to update it if you haven't yet submitted it. So wait until you've got all of your income documents before you sit down to prepare. Obviously, if you haven't received any income, you'll be able to do it as soon as tax season opens there, if you're not waiting on any income documents.
Somebody asks, do you file your own W-2 or does the university provide you with one? Also, do you need to get an SSN after you get a job and then you get your W-2, or should you have your W-2 to get an SSN?
No, you'll be able to get an SSN before you have your W-2. Your employer, whoever that is, be it your university or whoever, they will issue you with the W-2. So you should receive that by the 31st of January. You'll need that then when you're preparing your tax return. So when you sit down, you go through the questionnaire with Sprintax, you reach the income detail section, you'll be able to take a picture or upload a digital copy of that form, and it'll pre-fill that information there for you. So you need to have that W-2. You get that from your school or your employer, whatever the case may be, and then you upload that into the Sprintax software and we'll do the rest.
Basically, you get a job, you apply for a social security number. At the end of the tax year, you get a W-2 from your employer. That could be your university or your internship or whatever. Then you use that W-2 and you put it in Sprintax, and Sprintax will auto-populate everything you need to like fill out in your forms, and then you can submit, and it takes like an hour. I've done it before. Somebody also asks, is Sprintax free to use?
So I suppose a lot of you on today's session, your schools will have already partnered with Sprintax. They'll provide you with access to Sprintax. You may receive a code from them. In some cases, that will cover the federal filing fee for you, or it might provide a discount on that federal filing fee. If it's a case that your school don't work with Sprintax already, The fee for a federal return is $51.95, and the fee for a state return, if needed, is $44.95. But do look out for an email. You may receive something from your school. So if they've got a code, be sure to enter that in the checkout box at the end, and that will either cover the fee in full for federal, or it'll discount that.
Another question is, how do you know which scholarships are taxable and which are not?
So chances are you'll receive a 1042S form if your scholarship is taxable. If you're unsure, you can always reach out to your school and just double check that. But generally, if your scholarship covers just your tuition, it's not considered taxable. If it covers anything outside of tuition, so maybe room and board, meals, transport to and from school, any of those living expenses, we'll say, that is considered taxable and will trigger a filing requirement. So it'll be the 1040 NR as opposed to just Form 8843.
Any other questions?
And we'll share that we'll have a free webinar series as well throughout tax season. I know we'll do one with Rome, especially, later in the year or early in the year, I should say. But there is a series of other webinars that everyone can come along to. You can join any you like. So, of course, we'll share that with Rome, and they'll be able to share that with you.
I think the biggest takeaway we want you to have is that you don't have to worry about your taxes when services like Sprintax exist. You don't have to worry about building your credit score, this and that, when services like Adro exist. And that's why there are brilliant partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Sprintax as well, when you sit down to prepare your taxes, I know it can seem daunting. It may be your first time filing taxes in the US, but I suppose the big thing is, don't worry, sit down, go through the software. It's very straightforward. We'll ask the questions we need to determine exactly what your filing obligations are. You also have access to 24/7 live chat throughout tax season. So if you do have questions as you're going through that, use the live chat. We've got agents ready and waiting there to assist with any questions you've got.
Yeah, we have all the tools. We're making this super simple because when we moved abroad, we knew absolutely nothing. And that's sort of the reason we're building Rome. As you will see very shortly after this video, Ansh is putting out a small little reel explaining why we're doing this. But long story short, it's very complicated to move to the US. So we've aggregated all the partners and all the businesses that make this process super simple. And we're bringing them to you. So any questions you have, we're here to answer them. We're available on Instagram, Reddit soon. Feel free to drop us an email. I'll drop that in the chat as well. And feel free to email our partners as well. So Elvera has her email and so does Sara. So if you have any questions regarding their services, that being Adro and Sprintax, feel free to reach out to them. And I'm sure they'll connect you to the right person on that team or answer it themselves. They'd be more than happy to help. So feel free to take advantage of everything we have to offer.
Yeah, and I've just popped my email into the chat there. If anyone does want to reach out with any questions, feel free.
All right, it's 11:05 a.m. Sara, sorry, you have the floor.
No, it's okay. Just wanted to say my email's there too. It was great connecting with you guys. Please let us know if you have questions. We're happy to help.
Awesome. It's 11:05. Well, I don't want to keep Sara and Elvera for any longer than I've asked them to be here for. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for the audience for sticking by and asking all these questions. We really sincerely hope this was useful to you. This session is recorded, so it's going to go live on YouTube either today or tomorrow, whenever I find some time to upload it. And you can watch it any other time. If you have any questions, hit us up on Instagram, hit us up on the WhatsApp community, email us. We're here to help. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.